we could shoulder these things now, right? So I was reading some of the comments on one of the last videos I posted about the Surefire backup light that I just got. So I did kind of like a basic overview of it, and Angel993 was saying I should do a proper video accessorizing the different types of setups for pistols and rifles, and talked a little bit about like SBR versus non-SBR, I guess, for defensive situations. So I guess this is interesting to me because like I've thought about a lot of this stuff, and like, you know, I like I said, I'm not an operator. I don't claim to be one. And basically, like, I like guns, and I like things that work well for different kind of defensive situations that I might come across. So sometimes, you know, like I'll play around with like stuff that I might consider for home defense. And typically there's a lot of thought process between what goes best in terms of like a home defense gun. I have a lot of thoughts on that, and I mean, there's a lot of opinion out there, but what I'm going to go over today is the exact setups that I run, and this is kind of like my thought process for it. So basically, to start off with, I think handguns are great for home defense. I think one of the biggest reasons why is because it's small, it's compact, it's easy to keep one by your nightstand or somewhere near where you sleep, and because they're small, you know, it's easy to conceal them away when they're not in use. So I think that's one of the biggest things. For me, I like Glocks for the reason that they're simple, they're reliable, they work well. I really don't care much for them beyond that, in terms of like, it wouldn't break my heart if, let's say, I use my gun in a defensive situation and then, you know, they came and they had to do an investigation, and usually they take away the firearms on the premise to do the investigation, and, you know, somebody else handling the stuff that belongs to you can sometimes be a little bit nerve-wracking. You know, they're not going to care about your gun, they're just going to toss it down, and basically, like, you know, like a lot of things can happen to it. So realistically, you know, if I had to use my Glock, I wouldn't be like too heartbroken about handing it over, because it's just a Glock. You know, you can get these, they're a dime a dozen, well, a little more, a couple more dimes than that. But basically what it comes down to is it's not gonna break my heart. Like if I ever got my 5.7 taken away, man, that would kill me. Or like, you know, I got a lot of guns that, you know, I mainly use as like collector's items, and they're fun pieces that I have, fun range shooters, but I typically don't use these for defensive purposes for that reason. If it came down to it and I really had to use it, I obviously would, but it is one of those things where I'm not gonna be heartbroken if I lose this, or, you know, something bad happens to it. I have a fairly simple setup. Basically, the first thing I usually do when I get a workhorse gun is gonna be night sights on a Glock. These are Trijicon 3-dot night sights. They're pretty standard. They're like your classic combat style sight. The reason I like this is just because I'm used to shooting 3-dot combat style sights. There's a lot of new fancy setups like the straight 8 style. You know, some guys are running like just a neon dot on the front with the tritium vial, and like a naked rear, which is just black with maybe some serrations. You know, there's a lot of different fancy setups. I don't really have a particular like affinity for those, mainly because I'm just used to what I'm used to. So I just like having the 3 tritium vials. That's how I run it, and it just like the sight picture is really nice for me, and it works well. If you have any kind of steel sights on the Glock, I think that's a great way to go. I also like to run Surefire weapon lights on my guns, and the reason for that is Surefire does put a lot of R&D into making lights that can handle the recoil of a firearm. They're also very robust, and Surefire has a no hassle lifetime guarantee on their warranty. So basically, you know, if you ever for some reason break the light, the mount stops working, whatever it is, you can contact Surefire and they'll get you taken care of. This is the Surefire X300, and basically it's their 600 lumen light. This is the screw-on model, and basically I never take this one off. This one's basically the bedside home defense gun. It's got 17 rounds in the magazine, plus 1 in the chamber for 18 rounds. I usually carry with a full capacity. I usually carry with a full capacity, loaded up, ready to go. The trigger on this one is pretty much just a factory trigger. I have put a Tango down slide hold open, as well as a Tango Down extended mag release on my Gen 3 Glock 17. And yeah, I mean, I pretty much run it pretty standard. There's nothing really special about this gun, but it works. You know, I've shot it a bunch, and Glocks are just very reliable. But this is how I run it. So I think the best part about it is the switchology on the lights are awesome, because there's pressure pads and they're the same on both sides. So basically the switch, the momentary and constant is built in. The constant, you just rotate up or down and it stays on until you flip it off. And then basically you can push forward on it to activate momentary. And because the function is exactly the same on both sides, it doesn't matter if I'm using it left-handed or right-handed, I can still momentarily have it on, and then when my finger leaves the pressure pad, it turns off automatically. Or I can flip the switch down and keep it on constant until I, finish with whatever I'm doing, and then I flip it off. And I think this is one of the best switches on the market. I don't know why they didn't implement that switchology into the XC1. Maybe it's too small to fit that for some reason, because having the bezel on the front is kind of a plus and a minus. It does allow for you, for instance, if you had to do a muzzle strike, the gun will not go out of battery, which renders it not able to fire. So that's kind of a nice thing. They do put a crenulation on the front of the bezel just to protect the lens, as well as, if you do need to strike something, you can. The other part of it is, because it does stick out that far out of the front of the muzzle, you tend to get a lot of carbon buildup on the top as well as on the lens. And if you shoot enough like that, it's going to coat the lens to the point where, light isn't going to come through, or it's not going to come through as efficiently, so you're not going to have a decent light source. So that can be problematic. Realistically, if you're done at the range, you can clean that carbon off. If you clean it off regularly, it shouldn't be an issue. It's just a minor nuisance. So it is one of those things where, you just got to make sure to keep this clean, but otherwise it's pretty much good to go. It is also really big. So I run my Glock 19, or one of my Glock 19s, the exact same way. And basically this one is an X300 as well, but it's the A model. I believe this one's a 500 lumen. I think the A models now have 600 lumens, but same body style, except the mount's different because it's quick disconnect rather than a screw-on mechanism that holds it in place. I like this one for the 19 because sometimes I'm gonna run just the 19 pistol by itself. I have the exact same night sights on it. I have the same mag release and the slide hold open, just because I want to keep everything consistent. So there's nothing different about those pistols, except really that there are different models and the light is different because I can pop this on and off very quickly. So the A model is actually one of my favorite reasons for that, because it just pops on and off. The switches seem to be a little bit thinner on this one, so I think the B model is the one that has the fatter switches. It's easier to push on. These are a little bit sharper, but the function is exactly the same with momentary and constant. So sometimes I'll like to run it with the light, and then if I don't, and I carry with it, I'm gonna take that off and run it just with the pistol by itself. But yeah, I usually default to Surefire lights just because they're reliable. Same thing with the Glock and same thing with my light. I want them to work all the time. So basically, these are kind of like my usual setups. I also have a Glock 43 that I'll carry with just no light and night sights. And basically that'll be more for scenarios where I really need, it's more important for concealment rather than having something that has more firepower. So my 19 is my usual deference for what I'm going to carry with no light. Sometimes I'll carry the light in my pocket, and then if I need to put it on there, I can. This one is kind of my home defense, just because I can control the 17 a little bit better, not by much, but enough that, the size doesn't matter so much because I just keep it at home and I use it at home. I got a little bit more capacity, and the light stays on there all the time. It doesn't come off because I've screwed it on, and it's a little bit of, it just takes some extra time to take the light on and off. So those are the pistols that I run. If you have a suppressor, by the way, for your handgun, I think it's awesome. A lot of people think, oh, why do I need a suppressor? And I think one of the biggest things is hearing protection, especially for a home defense scenario. This one is a Silencer Co. Octane 9mm suppressor. It's pretty big, so I don't have a threaded barrel in here right now, but if I did, you're talking pretty decent length. Now, it's still a lot smaller than having a shotgun or a rifle, but I don't necessarily think that it's something that would be required for home defense. If you just have a handgun and a light on it, or even just a handgun on its own, I think that's fine. But having the suppressor on there really helps with, if you need to communicate, be on the phone, your ears won't be ringing afterward. This is actually a Griffin Industries suppressor cover, and they have like a carbon weave in here that's basically supposed to be super heat resistant, so you can actually handle the suppressors even when they're hot. So it's kind of like having a heat pad fixed to it all the time. You just tie down the bungee cord, which, to be honest, like, it's not my favorite way of tying it down, but at the same time, these covers are the best on the market. I have not found another suppressor cover that works as well as these are. They also come in a lot of different flavors, so I've got an FDE cover here, and I also have one in the AOR camo pattern. This is actually really awesome, one of my favorites. I love the camo pattern on it, but yeah, basically these are awesome if you have suppressors, just because a lot of times if you shoot a lot of rounds through it, which you probably won't shoot enough for it to be like hot enough for it to burn things, but it could melt, especially like your skin, clothing, anything you set the gun down on that the suppressor might touch. I have seen people light things on fire when they put bare suppressors into range bags, on tables, chairs, benches, the ground, because the suppressor is so hot it just transfers that heat and like melts things and starts burning stuff up. So basically, if you get a suppressor, it's a good idea to have a cover on it just in case you need to, if you touch the suppressor on something. If you're running a rifle, I'll get into that later. Yeah, so basically that's kind of how I run my pistols, and if you have a suppressor for your handgun, it's great. I don't think it's 100% necessary for handguns, but it definitely helps a lot, especially because you're not going to just throw on your hearing protection first thing as soon as you hear something go bump in the night. Rifles. So I actually really like rifles for defensive purpose. The reason I like rifles is because, for one thing, there's very low recoil. They're a lot easier to control because you can actually like shoulder up the gun and have something to brace up against you as a third point of contact. So you got two hands and on the shoulder. One of the big things about having a rifle, though, is if you are in a home defense scenario, you may be in a place where it can be kind of difficult to maneuver. So if you're running a carbine, like a 16-inch barrel with a collapsible buttstock, usually you're at about 36 inches with the buttstock fully collapsed. This is actually an AR pistol, so I've got the shockwave blade on there. This is 11.5 inch, but basically, if you have the ability to have a smaller platform that you can utilize, I think that's a good thing. I would say that you could still run a carbine and just be fine, or even like a bullpup. Got a couple bullpups right here. Bullpups really, shorten the length up and make it easier to maneuver. I do like having pistols and SBRs, so I do have an SBR as well. And basically what it is if you're gonna run a rifle, I think the advantage is you have 30 rounds and it's a very easy to control weapon. Very low recoil in 5.56, and depending on the type of ammo that you use, 5.56 can actually be quite good for defensive purposes, because instead of carrying its weight and energy through like walls and stuff like that, a lot of times it'll tumble and transfer a lot of its energy immediately, and it can reduce any basically casualties, in terms of having like stray rounds that miss your target. There's a lot of 5.56 rounds that you can get out there that are effective for home defense purposes. On a rifle, because rifles are a lot louder than handguns are, I would say it would be a good idea to have a suppressor if you can. Now the thing about this is, once again, go into the length issue, where this is an 11.5 inch barrel. If you have a 16-inch barrel or even a 14.5, with usually rifle cans are about 6 inches long, so it's gonna add some length to it. So right now I'm a lot closer to 16 inches on the suppressor mounted to the gun. So as you can see now, it's starting to get a little bit longer, and because of that, it's not going to be as maneuverable. The extra weight on the front of the gun with the suppressor is also going to make it more difficult, because you have to deal with the extra weight and the length when you're moving around. And if you're moving around inside of a house, you can potentially bump into things with it. Having the suppressor on there and having it be super hot, it's not that dissimilar from having a hot barrel, but the suppressors do trap the gases coming out of the front of the gun, which means it's going to get a lot hotter a lot faster. So that's why I have this cover on here, and that can prevent, like if I have it on a sling and I drop it, it's not going to burn my leg. I'm also not going to burn or melt things that I bring the suppressor near to it, as well, a lot less likely to, because it's covering the heat. And so that can be something beneficial that I was talking about with the cover. But essentially what it is, you know, that extra weight and length is going to be a little bit of a disadvantage, but it'll help your hearing. So that's kind of how they're pushing the legislation for the making suppressors like non-NFA, which means you might be able to purchase them as an accessory or maybe a firearm in the future. But essentially what it is yes, it will protect your hearing to a certain degree. Now, the suppressor on the front of the gun, because 5.56 is so fast, it's still going to be super loud, which means you're still going to get that ringing, and it's not going to be 100% hearing safe for you to shoot without ears, but it will be significantly better than having nothing on the front of the gun. Like 11.5, 10.5 inch barrels, or even 16-inch barrels inside are insanely loud. And so that's going to be one thing where your hearing is going to suffer for a little bit if you do decide to run it that way. So what I've got here is my SR15 build, and basically I'm running it pretty simple too. I don't really try to like put a lot of fancy crap on my guns, just because I want it to be as light as possible and easy to use. So I've got a Surefire light on here. I am pretty big on the Surefire lights. This is a Scout M600 with the pressure pad, and basically you've got momentary. When I let go with my thumb, then it's going to turn off, and I also have a constant button up top so I can leave it on until I'm done, and then I click it to turn it off. So it's pretty simple and straightforward with how it's mounted. Just mounts right to the Picatinny rail, and then the pad clamps to the top. I would highly recommend zip tying the additional cord down. There's about 7 inches of cord that just hangs around, so I definitely recommend zip tying that down, as well as the pressure pad. But I haven't quite exactly configured it down yet on the rifle, so I'm just kind of playing around with it right now. But typically I'm going to run something like this with a light and a pressure pad, and I have the light on the opposite side of the rifle from my body, so that way if I do, you know, drop the rifle with it on a sling, the light isn't going to just like smash into me. I'm running a simple red dot. I like red dots a lot. I think for the most part, I don't do a lot of distance shooting, so red dots actually pretty much do the trick for me. This one is an Aimpoint T1 Micro. These have been around for a long time. I am a big fan of Aimpoints. The reason for that is because Aimpoints are very reliable and their battery life is crazy long. This one on a medium setting should last about, I think they say around 5 years on a single 2032 battery. That's pretty impressive. They do make aftermarket battery covers that will hold an additional battery that you flip the other way so it doesn't decharge that one as well. So you could potentially have 10 years worth of battery use on 2 batteries stored on the optic at all times. This is a LaRue mount. It's in the lower third co-witness, and it's quick disconnect, and they hold their zero very well. They're a rock solid mount, so I really like that. Otherwise, I mean, typically this is pretty much like, I wouldn't say Knights is generic, but if you are running like an AR-15, I think with just like a straight free float quad rail, having a light, having the an Aimpoint or a red dot of some kind, I think would be very ideal. Not everybody can rock an AR for home defense purposes. You know, maybe you don't have a great place to store it, you know, just to have easy access to it. Maybe, you know, it's just not something that's viable for you. But if you can use an AR-15, I think it's a great choice, just based on the controllability, the higher capacity magazine. I mean, you can put a 30 round magazine into a Glock, but I just think, you know, the controllability of the 5.56 round and shooting it out of a rifle is, I just think it's better. I mean, this is not a rifle, but essentially, you know, in the base platform, it is the same as an AR-15 carbine or rifle. That's pretty much like how I'm running my stuff. So I like to have some options, but realistically, I'm either going to defer to a rifle or a handgun, which is pretty much like what I'm going for. Sometimes if you're really feeling it, you can dual wield. I don't recommend doing that because you won't be being very accurate with it, unlike me, who's mastered the art of dual wielding over a long period of time. But you know, it is one of those things where having the option for both, I think, is great. Just depends on the situation that you're in. Shit hits the fan, zombies have arrived, probably gonna grab the AR-15 first. Hear a bump in the night or a door gets smashed in, probably just gonna grab my Glock because it's simple, and you know, I can use a second hand to do things instead of just having to put both hands on the rifle. Because that is one thing about having the rifle, is if you gotta use both hands to control the weapon, it's gonna be more difficult if you have to do something with your offhand, like open a door, you know, be on the phone with 911 or whatever that is. So that's pretty much just a quick video just talking about my setups and kind of like what my thoughts are if you're doing it for home defense. That's really shout out for Angel993, just asking that question. I do appreciate that. And yeah, if you like the video, please like and subscribe. I've got stuff that I post on Facebook that you won't see on the YouTube channel, so you can definitely check that out. Comment, show me some love. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time. Dual wheel. It's a disco party.